Doesn't sound bad to me.
Yeah, is that so wrong?
It doesn't sound so wrong to me. So we have, let me find, here we go. I gotta find all my
I would
buttons.
say,
It's the joys of being the producer here, finding all my buttons. Um, According to former FBI agent Joe Navarro, who spent 40 years with the FBI studying human behavior, he says these are the 5 traits, that's what we're going to talk about today, that extraordinary people have, or what sets them apart. And the key thing here, and he's got that but in there, you need to have the entire set.
it's
So
important.
yeah. So if you're like 3 out of 5, hey, good for you. We've got a little work to do.
Yeah, it's always room to grow. And before we dive into it, I would like to say I think extraordinary kind of has its own meaning a bit inside of us. And let's just loosen up the frame here and say being extraordinary can mean whatever you want it to mean for yourself. It doesn't mean you have to be a celebrity or famous or revered by tons of people, or a billionaire or a millionaire, or
Right.
a titan of industry, or a recognized thought leader. It's like you could be the most extraordinary parent you want to be, and that's your like contribution to the world and fulfills you deeply. You just have to know what that truly is for you. You could be, and I like thinking the idea of like self-actualized and extraordinary maybe meaning the same thing. Like you're fully expressed within yourself, whatever that means to you.
Right.
You could be the greatest, custom shoe repair person in the world, and that would be the deepest expression of who you are and what you want to be in the world.
Right. Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Nice distinction, because you can create your own reality, and that's kind of, and we do, what's real out here in the world, and then what I perceive the world to be as my own reality, and then however your mind perceives what it's seeing, hearing, smelling, experiencing is creating its own reality. And it's interesting. I was just reading an article, and then we'll jump into this, because I want to go through what those 5 pieces are of being extraordinary. I was reading an article yesterday, and it was talking about beliefs. Essentially, they were talking about beliefs. They worded it a little bit differently. And we've got a little bit of hum. I want to check and see if that's you or me. All right. And
Is there a problem with audio or something?
Yeah, it's a little bit of static here and there. But what I was reading about was a gentleman, and I forget his name, of course, now. He's from Australia. So in Australia, they do these races. They're like 48 hours, or you got to run 100 miles. They're like ultra marathons. And this gentleman who was a farmer shows up in overalls and galoshes. It was normal what he would wear if he was farming and those types of things. And he goes to enter this race. And it's an ultra marathon. So you've got all these people that have been working out and on these regiments, eating, special type of foods. They got the special shoes and the special pants. And this guy just shows up in farm boots and overalls and says, hey, I want to enter the race. And so the news got a hold of him, and they're like, well, what makes you think you can do this race, knowing how long of a distance it is? It's going to take a couple of days in order to run this race. And he goes, well, I grew up on the farm. We were sheep herders. And when time came to bring the sheep in, we had 400 sheep on 400 acres of land. I never knew how long I was going to be out there. I could be out for a day. I could be out for 2 days. I could be out for a week. You have to bring the sheep in. He goes, I'm used to going all the time. It's what I do for a living. And so, of course, there was a group of people that kind of made fun of him and thought, this Okie is just, he's out of his league. So anyhow, the race goes off. Well, guess who ends up in first? Farmer guy does.
Ooh.
Not only is it farmer guy in first, but he breaks the record by quite a bit.
Really?
He just destroys the record. And where belief comes into this is that all of the experts, all of the professionals would run for 18 hours and then they would sleep for 6 hours. And so they had this whole regimen. This is, to be the best version of yourself, in order to exceed at this race, you had to sleep for 6 hours and then you would run, walk, whatever it is, for 18 hours. Well, this guy didn't know that. He just knew on the farm, you had to get all the sheep in now. You didn't have time to sleep. He didn't sleep. He just ran the whole thing the whole way, and he did not sleep, and everybody was blown away. So the following year, he enters the race again, ends up hurting himself, injuring himself. He's not able to complete the race. However, the professionals, using the new knowledge, the new belief that you don't need to sleep 6 hours, went through the whole thing without sleeping, and because they had been properly trained and all those types of things, actually broke his record from the year before. And then the following year they broke it. And then they also learned, and they used his last name, it's the something Shuffle, where he did not run. He kind of shuffled along, and they did research on this, and they found that you didn't expend as much energy when you kind of shuffled your feet. So instead of stepping and running, they started really looking at the scientific aspects of, well, do we actually have to lift our feet? Because that was the belief. Of course, you would run. You have to lift your feet. This is the way it's always been done. This is the best way of doing it. This is the way the experts do it. So anyway, sometimes belief can really hold us back from what we're doing. So kind of when you're talking about what it is to be extraordinary, allow yourself, is kind of what you were saying, to figure out what that extraordinary is. You don't have to limit yourself to what other people have already done or haven't done yet.
Yeah. What if, God, the synergy of that story is like beautiful and fascinating, right? So there's the experts kind of collectively participating in their beliefs about how it has to work and what the best practices are. And then this guy comes in completely out of that bubble, shatters it. And then seeing what he did, then the experts, iterate on that and become even better than that.
Right.
Man, really interesting.
Yeah.
So we can do so much together, and God, fascinating. It's like, what is it, Niels? I think a famous physicist said, on the opposite end of a profound truth is often another profound truth. So it's like we can get so much together by working together and like developing our beliefs and our knowledge and working together. And then someone comes out of nowhere and shatters it completely, being not even exposed to that at all.
Right.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Cool story. Thank you.
Yeah. Hey, that's what I'm here for, sharing cool stories. Let's go ahead and, you know what? Let's go ahead and show the article, even though it's got all these terrible ads on the side. This is I forget who this was. Oh, this was a CNBC article that you found, Will, talking about the 5 extraordinary traits. Let's talk about what those 5 are, and then I think we can kind of come back and talk about a little bit more in detail. 1 being self-mastery, 2, observation. And observation's an interesting one. Looking forward to get into that. Communication, which I think most people are aware of. Imagine that. Number 4, you got to take action. Who knew? And then physiological comfort, which we're definitely going to talk about that, because I have some thoughts on that. But let's start with number 1, which was self-mastery, and kind of really talking about what they talk about is bringing out the best in what you do. And I think this one's kind of interesting in the sense that some people would consider themselves a master of something, and then other people are kind of a jack of all trades and a master of none.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I would say whatever you choose to be in the world, mastering yourself and knowing yourself is the most important thing. I mean, there's arguments for both, and they're super valid. I kind of fall more in the the master of none kind of category, because I just get so curious about so many things and want to dive into it. But mastering yourself doesn't have much to do whether you choose to go deep in something or whether you choose to go broad in your life on a lot of things.
Right, for sure. And they kind of mentioned the fact of like a Usain Bolt, Michael Jordan. I thought they mentioned somebody else, but you could throw so many people into this who actually through self-mastery. And I think with a lot of this is also coaching, right? They didn't just do it on their own. They didn't find the self-mastery on their own. And even I think what some of the greatest self-mastery would be people who are in martial arts, who, you know, the amount of discipline it takes to become a master in any form of martial arts, if you will, it takes a lot of work.
Having spent 22 years in the martial arts, I can attest to that. You learn a lot about yourself. You can't not learn a lot about yourself by participating in it long enough. So it has a really cool effect that maybe you're looking for, maybe you're not, but it's going to happen either way.
Yeah. You know? Yeah. And I think where this really stands out, and I think it kind of blends into what you were talking about, is the fact that another side of self-mastery is really knowing your emotions, your strength, and more importantly, your weaknesses, because the better you understand yourself, you are going to be more in alignment with yourself. And from that self-mastery, there's that deeper knowledge of yourself, and to be able to be honest about your weaknesses and to find other people, things, objects, you know, whatever it might be that complement you, I think is really huge, especially these days, where if you try and do anything by yourself, I don't feel like you're going to be as successful as if you do it with somebody or a group of people who are kind of in the same alignment with you.
Yeah, not at all. And you have to know what makes you happy. Like, and a lot of that's related to saying knowing your strengths and knowing your weaknesses. I follow a lot of entrepreneurs and coaches and some really famous marketers and some famous teachers. And I've been noticing a lot, either it happened a long time ago and they never talked about it, or it's happening now. A lot of them are stepping down as the CEO of their company. And they're all saying something similar to the same effect, that it wasn't what made them happy and it wasn't what they were good at.
Right.
They founded something and it was creative and invigorating and they loved doing it, and it grew and grew and grew.
Right.
And then by default, you become the CEO, and CEOs don't get to spend a lot of time doing creative work and like doing these things. They spend a lot of time in meetings making sure every department is doing what it's supposed to, and they're building the future, and they're looking at financial forecasts and like really deep in the money side of things. And so it's interesting you say that, and it's like, it's cool to see. I'm like, oh, these people, you know, one, they've reached a huge level of success, and then two, they have a sense about what fulfills them in their life, and they're willing to take action on it. So they replace themselves as CEO and then get to do more of what they want to do in their companies.
Right.
And ultimately the company benefits from that as well.
Yeah. And it's an interesting
they were never that good at it. All of them said, like, I was okay. We didn't fail, we grow, but like, I'm not good at finance. It wasn't what I was good at.
Right. And if it doesn't feed the soul, and yet you've created this thing, it's like, why not focus on where you're really good at within the company? And I think that's kind of an ego check. That's an identity check, as far as, but if you're in the place of creating business and being a true entrepreneur, not somebody who creates a job for themselves, but a true entrepreneur that wants to actually create something that's bigger than themselves, I would imagine there's a lot of identity tied up to being the CEO, to being the leader, to being the person who's going to head this company to greatness. And then, like you're saying, they actually do it. One, they realize, wow, I'm not the best at it per se. Not because I functionally cannot do the job, but where's my emotional investment? Am I as emotionally invested in leading the company versus, oh, I would really love to do this aspect of the business instead, but is that going to make me look weak? Am I now a failure because I can't be the CEO, or I choose not to be the CEO? So those are interesting thoughts that people have to be willing, as you're mastering yourself, as in this step number one. Part of that self-mastery is being really honest. And this is kind of where no fucks given comes into this, is that we're not worried about society. We're not worried about what other people think. We're worried about what's best for us and what is going to make us happy, because I think the more in alignment we become with ourselves, we're just happier with ourselves. We're happier with our partners, family, friends, business, the whole 9 yards.
Yeah, and if you're in a position like that, who do you want to be revered by? People who look at your title and are impressed, or maybe secretly like jealous of it, or people who say, oh, you put yourself in a position to be happier and more fulfilled in your life. Right. That's something that I actually really respect. That's pretty incredible.
Yeah.
Because it takes an act of bravery. And a few of them do talk about that. They're like, I realized my ego was caught up in having this title for a long time. And it didn't like mean anything at the end of the day.
Right.
Or it wasn't the fulfilling thing that needed to happen.
Yeah. And there's actually and they have a name for it. I cannot think of what it is. And that is why most managers suck and why they're just not very good. It's because they do a great job at whatever level they're at. They get a promotion, and maybe they excel well there, so they get promoted again. And essentially they get promoted just above their skill set. And that's where everything just goes bleh. However, they earn the promotion, and in our society, we can't, it'd be a sign of weakness if we went back down. And if people are just really honest with themselves, it's like, how much happier would you be if you recognize the fact that maybe you got promoted just past, and it's not even necessarily your capabilities, but as an example, if you're in the nursing industry, there are nurses that actually work with the patients, and then there are nurses that work with the admin staff and do all the paperwork and those types of things. If you got in the nursing to take care of people, then there's a good chance that the admin side of things and the political side, working with middle management, making sure all the reports are done, you may not really enjoy that. Even though you were a great nurse, so you kept on getting promoted, and this was the next option. So at some point, also just being honest with yourself and going, you know what? I appreciate the opportunity, but that just doesn't sound like fun to me. So I'm not going to do it.
I know. I can't remember I know what you're talking about. I can't remember the name of it. It's called like the Jeff principle or the Tommy principle or theory or something. People get promoted to a level of incompetence, basically.
Yeah, incompetence is a good word there.
Everyone gets promoted to a point where they're not good at what they're doing because it's just how things work, essentially.
Right.
And I started my career in the sales industry, and that's famous for salespeople usually make terrible sales managers. Like, it's just known, basically, but still keep promoting. Usually the best salesperson gets the offer to be the sales manager. And then it's just not, it's a completely different job. It's not what they're good at.
Yeah. So with the self-mastery, there's a couple of bullet points down here. So as far as starting to attain self-mastery, it starts with asking yourself a couple questions. What areas need attention? And those are always the fun ones, right? Because it's not the easy stuff. I got to work on the areas that need attention. What knowledge, training, or skills will help me pursue my goals? So having a clear understanding of your goals, knowing what you want so you can actually get the knowledge and training that you need. What can I do now to initiate the change? And I think, well, that's something we've talked about in the past as far as what's the next best step or the next smallest step you can take to move towards what you want.
Yep.
And then lastly, how can I better myself through books, mentors, organizations, video tutorials, or online classes? And that one, I think you got to be careful of because there's so much information out there, you could actually be overwhelmed. So
yeah, and you really got to trust the person who's teaching it to you as well.
right,
Because
yeah,
anyone can be a teacher these days with the internet and the advance of technology.
right. Everybody's a guru and an expert,
That is true. Yeah.
including
I
us.
Well, like I said, we've spent years and years studying how to change beliefs and revise parts of our identity. And,
Right.
I don't think I would never call myself a master of that because I think it's just too complicated to ever feel that way. But having been involved in it since 2013, and I know you started a few years after that,
Right.
you can start leaning into some people about stuff,
Mhm.
but you just have to do your due diligence
Right.
and
Well-
really stay inside yourself about how you feel about people and whether their ethos, basically.
Yeah, and I think that 10,000 hours kind of plays into it also. There is a level of comfort and just where the knowledge really gets saturated into the brain, where it's there and easily available. You don't have to think about it or remember or concentrate on, oh, yeah, I know what the answer is. And you just practice is huge.
Yeah.
So,
And
all right.
before we move on, I love
Oh.
Socrates' quote about this: "Know thyself and become who you are." And
Yes.
that's kind of a big frame, but if you focus on nothing else in your life, I think that'd
Right.
be worthy of doing till you pass on, basically.
Yeah. And
Because knowing yourself is what will grow into everything else, essentially.
yeah. Who was the basketball player that dyed his hair all? Dennis Rodman.
Dennis
Remember
Rodman.
Dennis Rodman at all?
I actually didn't watch a whole lot of basketball growing up, but I
Okay.
regret it because I just watched The Last Dance, the
Okay.
documentary about Michael Jordan and the
Yep.
Bulls back
Yep.
in their last run.
Yeah.
And God, what a once in a lifetime kind of thing I missed out on.
Right. It
He's
was
a cool guy.
Yeah, it was
Interesting guy.
interesting. I was watching the same one and how Madonna influenced him and said,
That's right.
you get to be whoever you want. And he kind of went from this goofy, shy kid to,
That's right.
it's like, I'm going to wear my hat. I'm going to color my hair all different colors. I'm going to pierce myself in the ways that I want to. I'm going to wear a fur coat because I can, people. And how liberating that is to just be yourself.
Yeah. And what was fascinating about that, just to that point, was when he grew into being himself fully. It's like you jump and the net appears. He landed on a team where people truly understood who he was. You heard Scottie Pippen and Michael Jordan and Phil Knight and all these other people talk about it in the documentary. They're like, he's just a different kind of guy. Like,
Right.
like he was just different than all of us and he had to do what he had to do, but we let him and we understood because he always showed up and performed on the court. So we knew it wasn't affecting what really mattered, it was his performance.
Right.
So people like he was just surrounded by people who supported him.
Mm-hmm. So very, very powerful for sure. Yeah, I mean, there's a whole conversation right there we could talk about, but we're gonna do our best, folks, to stay on point here a little bit because we tend to ramble if you haven't noticed.
Those are my favorite times personally. Maybe it's the worst times for everyone else. I don't know.
Let's go down this alley. What's down this alley?
Yeah.
Ah, interesting.
Yeah.
We've actually made it to number 2, which is observation. What I really like about this one is that we're taught to look, but not observe. So there's a difference between actually, especially I think now with these finicky devices, it's like how many people are actually looking, much less observing what's going on And so there's a difference between making sure that you can actually get across the street safely, as he talks about here, or which line is moving faster. But he says that's a passive experience that's useful, but doesn't provide complete information. Observing, on the other hand, is active, requires effort. And as humans, we don't like to expend energy as much as possible. So we can resist effort sometimes. However, there's so much that becomes aware when you're actually able to do that. And I think it's it's almost like the glue that kind of holds everything together about being extraordinary, is actually being able to observe what's going on, because if you don't have the awareness, how can you make change?
Yeah, and I mean, at a human brain kind of level, we're designed to what's the word I'm looking for? We're always designed to conserve calories, so it's easier to look at something than it is to observe, because to observe, you have to make meaning out of what you're looking at, and whether you're observing a friend's behavior and deciding what that means in your relationship, or with a romantic partner, or kind of, I don't know, watching reality TV and trying to figure out what's going on, you still have to use your mind and actively engage in what's being looked at.
Right. And also the fact that we generalize so much in life, that it's another way of kind of saving energy. And if we get stuck in just generalizing things but not actually observing them and noticing what could be different, kind of going back to the guy in Australia, this is the way it was for those elite athletes: is you ran for 18 hours, you slept for 6 hours, you ran for 18 hours. This was going to get you the best results, and they just generalized it to be true. They didn't observe that there were any other options or different ways of doing things. And so because of that generalization, they actually restricted themselves quite a bit and didn't realize that there were other things. So while it can be difficult to go, oh, you know what, I'm going to take a clean slate and look at the world in a different way, or look at what I'm doing in a different way, that real intense observation and just noticing the nuances. And a lot of times those nuances, they don't become available early on. You don't see them early. It takes a little bit of time before you start noticing them. So giving yourself the time to be able to notice these things also.
Yeah. And checking in with your feelings about stuff too. And that can be a tricky thing, because knowing the difference between feelings generated by past trauma responses and past beliefs, and feelings generated by true, like, gut level intuition, parsing those out is a difficult thing. But still, noticing how you feel within yourself and how you react to different situations and react to what you're observing, essentially.
Right. Yeah. So a couple of things on this one that Joe Navarro points out is that what are they seeking, and where may be multiple explanations. So he's talking about these are skill sets that many people have or are lacking, how context or culture factors in. And I think a lot of times this is a huge one that people don't pay attention to in understanding what's unique. You talk about can't think of the movement where we're kind of erasing history, and we're like, we got to get rid of all these bad people because they had slaves, or we shouldn't it's not deleting.
Generalize, like a woke movement kind of generalization, or
it's that woke, but there's the sense that we need to delete some things from our history.
Cancel culture.
Thank you. Yeah, so this idea of cancel culture that, oh, well, this guy was a bigot, or this person, was a racist, or whatever it is, and not understanding that the time and the culture that they lived in. If you lived in the South back in the 1800s, chances are you were probably a racist to varying degrees. Not that everybody was, and not that everybody is. However, if you look at the culture, there's some, I think we have to give credit. We have to observe that if this is culturally a part of this person's upbringing, we have to observe that. We need to bring that into account. Same thing. If you grew up in the south of France and you're female and you go to a nudist beach all the time, it would not be awkward to go topless at the beach because everybody's doing it. If you grew up in an Amish community, you wouldn't even be in a bathing suit in the first place. And that's a cultural thing. So allow that person to express themselves in the way they want to because of the culture and the environment that they were raised in, I think is really important.
Context is fundamental to truly observing life.
Right.
I mean, how could you ever, and there's a lot of context that go into understanding things. So it can get difficult. And again, our brains are like, don't burn calories thinking about this too hard. But yet it's so important to think about some stuff really hard.
Right.
Christopher Columbus did a lot of horrible, deplorable, terrible things. But we're also here right now in part because of the fact that he existed and did what he did. So it takes a lot of calories to live in complexity, and people don't want to do that. And I don't think we have a choice. Life's complex, and you have to just include all kinds of things, especially about the past. Digging it up and thinking about it too much, learn from it. That's so important.
Right.
Don't be angry.
You don't have to live
about
in it.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. You don't have to live in it. And then kind of the next thing in this is how can you validate your observations and conclusions? So and I think for me, that's kind of a calibration thing. If you can validate what you've noticed, then that is going to help calibrate. Oh, okay. Yeah. Am I observing this without a lot of filters, as an example, where I feel like I just walked myself into a hole here, because a lot of times, you might be angry in the moment, and so somebody will do something, and so you'll respond, and because you're angry, it's an excuse to act out, where you're like, oh, you know what? If I was in their shoes, I would do the same thing. It wasn't intentional. I see it on the street sometimes where I'm like, if I'm in a rush and somebody pulls in front of me, they didn't cut me off, but because I'm in a rush and maybe I'm a little frustrated that day, oh, that guy's an asshole because he cut me off. And then I'm like, you know what? Given the same situation, I would have done the same thing as that person. But so kind of observing and understanding where you're at to validate your observations, I think, is very important.
Yeah, totally. Taking the opposite perspective is fundamentally important. I'm sure we'll get more into that in the next bullet point, but I had something and I lost it.
Okay.
Nothing.
If it comes back, let the audience know. They'd love to hear. And then how do you prioritize? And I think this one's really important, is separating the inconsequential from the essential.
Ooh,
it's like how many times, how do you prioritize and separate the inconsequential from the essential? Because a lot of times it's emotional. Emotionally, I want to do this, but how essential is that versus being a priority? And that one's a tough one, because hopefully, as everybody knows at this point, all our decisions are made by emotions. What feels good, we move towards. What feels bad, we move away from. And a lot of times what we know we need to do may not necessarily feel right or good. Not right per se, but good. It's like, I'd rather do this,
right,
even though it's not essential. But it feels good to do it now.
Yeah. And how do you discern what truly doesn't matter, even if it brings up emotions in you, right?
Right.
If your partner does something stupid and it triggers you and you get mad, or a friend does it, or whatever, like, what truly needs to be said and addressed and what doesn't. And I don't think I have an easy way to explain that other than just asking yourself that question constantly until it becomes a part of who you are.
Yeah. What you did say, though, kind of moves right into number 3, which is communication. And this, I think, is huge. I don't know how many people recognize how important rapport is. And we haven't really talked about rapport, but number 2 down here, it talks about building rapport. Maybe that's a future show, Will, is just talking about what rapport truly is and why it's important.
Definitely, because you and I learned it is not caring and kindness.
Yeah.
But it can include that.
It can include it, for sure. And also understanding that communication is not just the words we use. In fact, the words we use is a small percentage of what people are actually ingesting when you talk to them. Tone and inflection is huge, and then body language plays a big part of it also. And then the words tie in. Not that words are not important, because they are very important, but just realizing just because you go, "I'm happy," doesn't necessarily convey to somebody that you're happy, because of tone and inflection and other things going on.
People's physiology reveal the truth.
Yeah.
I think we all know this at a really deep innate level, whether we consciously are aware of it.
Right.
So, and our minds are taking in millions of bits of information every second, and we can't process nearly. We can get 0.05% of what we're actually observing. So
you're talking about consciously.
Feelings that consciously.
Yeah, because unconsciously, subconsciously, that the brain's processing everything, and it's going through all your list of filters and going, okay, this is the one line of code that you actually get out of the millions of lines of code. You only get this one little piece based on your own internal criteria.
Yeah. And, communicates a lot. If you're talking to your partner and you're like, "Yeah, baby, I really care about you."
Right.
That is a different communication than sitting down and, looking someone right in the eye and saying the exact same thing.
Right. Without smiling or cracking up or making funny faces.
No, there might be some room for levity, but who knows?
Yeah, it depends. Yeah, I guess it depends on the relationship.
It 100% depends.
Yeah. So here, when it comes to, it's not about, and I love this one here, it's not about communicating perfectly, because everybody is so unique that you're never going to be able to communicate perfectly. However, how can you be effective? That builds trust, and within trust, I'm going to include rapport, because if you don't have rapport, then you don't build trust. Totally agree. Emotions first. When I talk to people about this, when they get super excited, it's kind of like communicating or talking to somebody who's like really, really drunk. And they're just fixated. I gotta go to the Taco Bell. I need food. Just give me the Taco Bell now. It doesn't matter if it's 6 o'clock in the morning and everything's closed. They're not emotionally capable of having a conversation at that point. So at what point do you just find a way of kind of disarming that versus embattling them or trying to have a logical conversation with them? When people are emotional, the logical part of the brain kind of goes offline a little bit.
Yeah, entirely. And this is where taking the other person's perspective can be really useful for you. It's like,
right.
We only get an impression of it, and it's usually imperfect and incomplete, but it's like, what is this person experiencing right now? What are they feeling? Like, if we're disagreeing on something, what is their perspective on it? And since it's their perspective, why is it the truest, most valid, and important thing for them?
Right.
Even though I disagree.
Yeah. Yeah. So, deal with the emotional first. And one of the ways is actually asking people, how do you feel? Not what are you experiencing right now, but what is the experience making you feel? Because feelings really drive everything. And then from there, they talk about building rapport through caring and kindness. And they even say mirroring your companion's gestures goes far.
There you go.
That is part of rapport is actually kind of mirroring, not mimicking, but if I were to raise my right hand as an example and kind of wave to Will, ideally he's going to raise his left hand, even though it's
reversed here.
It's reversed here.
Yeah.
But if we were actually, as an example, if we were face to face and meeting in real life, if Will raised or waved with his right hand, I would respond with my left hand because he would see himself as a mirror essentially, and he's like, oh, the critter brain goes, oh, I'm with like kind. Where if we both
feel a little difference right now.
Yeah, is it a good difference? Is there a tingling in your belly?
It's more like the system relaxes a bit.
Yeah,
because you're right. It's the we do unconscious threat assessment all the time. And even if someone's not a threat, God, I mean, most of the people in our worlds are not truly threatening to our survival. So our threat assessment generalizes more to like, how's my status in this group? How am I being perceived? Like, what is global warming doing? What are all these things? Like it finds a way to make itself useful, even though it's not doing what it was designed to do, which is, oh shit, tiger 10 feet away. Like, okay, now we're in true threat mode. We just do a lower level of that about things that aren't important when we read the newspaper or when we're talking to someone we don't know very well. And when we build rapport with people, by mirroring their gestures, matching them energetically, with voice tone and pace and all these kind of things, it's an unconscious level of communication. It settles down the part of our brain that is always checking in on, am I safe? Am I with like kind? And when it's like, oh, like kind, safety, I can take a breath for a little bit here.
Right. And that's really what rapport is about at that point. And here I am trying to have rapport with you with my hand, and I'm realizing that we're mirrored, so I'm doing it wrong, and that I would actually want to do that for you, just to make you feel a little bit more comfortable.
Yeah. And this rapport stuff, man, it treats our nervous system almost like an operating system. Like it pushes a button and calms the nervous system down a bit, and all of a sudden we're just, I don't know, I just feel a little bit better. I don't know. It's just what's going on. It's unconscious. We don't really understand it, but we can notice it if we have a bit of acuity with ourselves.
Right. Yeah. And rapport is one of those things I would say for individuals out there watching, that if you're trying to build better relationships, may it be with friends, family, loved ones, business, is understanding what true rapport is. And again, it's not mimicking. If just because I wave, Will doesn't have to wave at the same time, as an example, then he would be kind of mimicking me, which we don't recommend doing. But being in true rapport is just a great way to connect with people in a way that makes them comfortable. And it's interesting because at that point, it's really, I think observation becomes really important, which they talked about earlier. I think it was step number 2. Observation is then really kind of understanding what's going on with that person. How can I be in rapport with that person? And at that point, you've got to be willing to take the attention off yourself and kind of invest some energy into that person, which shows up, I think, a little bit later in this list. But on the next one, just to kind of keep the ball rolling, because it's already 11 o'clock, be prompt.
Oh, jeez.
Answer emails, calls, text messages. Try and get back to people in a timely manner. It shows that you care. It shows that you're interested. There are some people that I know that get really anxious if I don't respond right away, and I don't want to be beholden to their experience of life. And so there are times where I don't respond right away because I don't want to create this the pitcher catcher type of thing where, oh yeah, if you pitch the ball, I'm going to respond right away and give it back to you. I'm actually going to hold on to the ball a little bit and do what we would call pace lead. And in that sense where I'm going to lead by delaying the response. And again, this is with people that are close to me so that their system can kind of get comfortable that, oh yeah, with Ryan, he always gets back to me, but sometimes it's not right away. And I want their system to kind of calm down a little bit. I don't want to actually feed into the system. But especially business, if it's important, if you can get back with people quickly, that's always helpful. Listen to validate. I think this is super important for a couple of reasons. One, validating somebody as part of rapport, and validating is not, oh, you're right, but just using the words, keyword backtracking the words that they're using is a great way of validating that you actually heard what they said. If they said that's a beautiful green automobile and they point to it, if I'm used to using the word car, or maybe it's a truck, instead of trying to make it point it out where they're incorrect and say, oh yeah, that is a beautiful truck, that is not validating. You're actually discrediting what they're saying, even though you're essentially talking about the same thing. But if I actually say, wow, that is a beautiful automobile, I'm validating what they're saying by using the same words. So I don't think we want to get deep into this because it is part of rapport, and I think we can talk about it. But it's really helpful. Yeah, it's really helpful. And then also, this is super, super key right here. The order of words that people use, and certain words, how often are certain words mentioned? Right, because if they're using, if they repeat a certain word, that just shows that in their system, this has deep meaning to them. And I think, again, that's something we can talk about in rapport. There are ways to kind of dig into the better understand what that meaning is for that individual.
It takes a bit of deep observation and good communication, but people will mark out words in certain ways. They'll emphasize it more. Their voice tone will go up, or their voice tone will go down. They'll just their system will make it obvious that something's very important. And catching that is a really important part about clean communication.
Right. And that would be observation. Number 2. So important. So important. Yeah.
Stacking them. You got to have them all.
Got to have them all. Got to have them all. They all kind of feed off one or the other.
Apparently you have to have them all.
Yeah. This one, action. I think it was John Asseroff that talked about Goya, the importance of Goya. Get off your ass.
Telling me about that.
Yeah, Goya, get off your ass. You can dream it and imagine it and chant it all you want, but if you're not willing to get off your ass and actually take action, this is where the rubber meets the road. There's all kinds of things that we could say about it, and I think everybody kind of knows this one. There are people that always say, "Oh yeah, let's do," or "Oh yeah, I would," "Oh yeah." And then when it comes down to that person actually taking action and doing it, they don't necessarily show up in the ways that you would want them to show up.
Yeah. And a lot of, if you actually watch, these kind of famous manifestation things like, the Secret and stuff like that, they do talk about that. But, the big kind of overarching takeaway with people like, oh, if I just think about something, it comes about. That's how it works, right? And it's not, there's a lot more to it than that. But taking action, if you think about it in frames of creating your life and being who you are and being in alignment and like no fucks given, just being authentic, taking action is a strong, like really, really, really strong suggestion to your subconscious about what it's supposed to respond to. The subconscious works deductively, and the more input it gets from our thoughts and from our actions, the more it just goes, oh, okay, this is what life is like. This is what we're creating. This is who I am. This stuff happens over time, but that's kind of how it works functionally. So taking action, visualizing stuff is incredibly important. Feeling stuff is incredibly important. And then doing stuff is like a somatic input about what you want your reality to be like.
Right.
So fundamentally important.
Yeah, and we have that on the list for a future conversation also.
Yeah.
Kind of talking about that stuff.
Stay tuned in a week or two.
Stay tuned. So a couple of the bullet points here under taking action is kind of looking at yourself, the way you behave in life, and do your actions build trust? Do your actions add value?
I would say, and trust and value for yourself and for others. Think of it internally and externally.
Right. Do my actions positively influence or inspire? I know so many people who all they can talk about is negative things going on in life. Personally, I'm of the belief that doesn't really help anything. And so if you notice that you talk a lot of negative terms, what is that experience like for you if you actually flip it around and focus on what it is that you would like? What are the positive things going on that you would like to be able to see in the world? And therefore, you can actually move forward in life in a positive way. So are your actions negatively affecting people or positively? And then how do your actions benefit others, if at all?
Yeah. Keep it in mind, people.
Keep it in mind. All right. And then number 5, the psychological comfort.
Psychological comfort. There we go.
Psychological comfort. We have some thoughts about this. It's where is it? The second forms bedrock. Here it is. We thrive when we have psychological comfort, and it's especially essential in difficult times. In this section, I mean, this is like psychological comfort is a huge chunk in the first place to talk about, and I think within the context of this article, 3 paragraphs or 4 paragraphs that he has just doesn't do it justice at all.
No, not at all.
So it'd be interesting talking to this gentleman, Joe Navarro, kind of and learning more about this, because I had some kind of like some question marks about this, and kind of my take on it, especially this one line, we thrive when we have psychological comfort, and it's especially essential in difficult times, is kind of finding that balance in yourself. If you're balanced, if you're kind of centered, you have more bandwidth or more availability to deal with difficult times than if you're always stressed out or anxious. It just it loads up the system, and therefore you don't have the same bandwidth. So that's my take on it.
It gives you a firm foundation to push off of. Think about if you're doing push-ups on the hard ground, that's one thing, right? You can predict how the response to your body is going to be. The ground's not going to move. If you're doing push-ups on, let's say you put a ball down and you have a flat board and you're doing push-ups that way, it becomes imbalanced and wobbly. Right. And elite athletes do it because that's good for you, if you're in excellent shape. But for the metaphor here, if let's say you're running some form of, either developmental PTSD or military grade PTSD, big T trauma or little T trauma, if you don't know where your next meal is going to come from, if you don't know how you can pay your bills, if your family and friends and the people around you and your boss and your coworkers are abusive or invalidating, I'm just thinking right now, it could be all kinds of stuff.
Right.
If you're not feeling safe inside yourself and your needs aren't met, it's so hard to stretch to the next level and to
Right.
get there. And we hear about people who do, right? Some people have these incredible stories about overcoming impossible adversity.
Right.
And we hear about these stories because, they're incredible and they're rare. It's like when you hear about people winning the lottery, you don't hear about all the people who lost the lottery. That's kind of what we're talking about with this.
Right. Yeah. And it gives people hope. And without hope, I think it's life is pretty tough in general if you don't have hope. Even people that are, wildly successful and very happy, they have a lot of hope as far as what's going on in the world for themselves and what they're doing and who they are. If they start losing hope, then they lose the psychological comfort, as I think is kind of where you're going with this. And from there, now you're standing on really unstable ground, and it's difficult to move forward and kind of be that extraordinary person that you want if your foundation is really shaky, your mental foundation.
Yeah. And he didn't say it explicitly, but when I read that part of the article, it just made me think of, Maslow's hierarchy of needs and, Maslow's pyramid, right? You have to have your base needs met first, right? The foundation of the pyramid are these things are like, are you safe? Are you relating with people? Are you okay? Generally, are your needs being met to survive? Like, do you have shelter? These kind of things.
Right.
That was kind of how I interpreted what he said.
Yeah, and I kind of
that may not be what he meant, but that's how I heard it.
Yeah, no, I think that makes sense. It actually clarifies things for me a lot, in the sense that it's like you can't even worry about up here what you want if down here isn't taken care of first. You don't have as you were talking, if you don't, you're not sure how you're going to pay the heating bill and it's the middle of winter. You're not sure how you're going to feed yourself or your kids. That's going to take up a lot of resources mentally and emotionally. And it's like, well, how can you be the best version of yourself if some of those base needs aren't taken care of? So that makes a lot more sense to me. Because there was so much in here I felt wasn't being said, but I think what you just said really kind of puts the nail on the head.
And it made me think of an experience I had in my life that really it sums it up for me perfectly. Is in what I thought he was saying. I've been involved in martial arts since I was 15. I've done a few different disciplines, and I spent a summer doing Brazilian jiu-jitsu. And I had this trainer, this black belt from Brazil. His name is Baca. He was total badass, really cool guy. I spent this summer, and the classes were small, so I felt really fortunate. I got a lot of time with him, and we would spar, or they call it rolling. We would roll together a lot of the time, and he was unrelenting. He would just brutalize me, and what I mean by that is he was so good and I was so new that no matter what position on the mat we would get in, he knew how to restrict my breathing. He knew how to put pressure on my diaphragm no matter what. If I was on my belly, he knew what spot to put pressure on my back to make it hard to breathe. If we were in he knew how to make it hard for me to breathe like every minute when we would roll together. And I didn't notice it in the time, but when I think back on it, I'm like, all I could do, the only thing I could do the entire time was think about how am I going to keep breathing. I would go, all I could do was make sure that I could take these tiny breaths. And what that did was keep me from playing the game. And in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, the game is a lot like chess. You need to be thinking 3 steps ahead, 4 steps ahead. If I do this, then they're going to do this, and then I'm going to do this, and then I'm going to catch them with this. You have to be playing like 3 deep, 4 deep kind of thinking when you're a master and you're good at it. But when all I could do was think about surviving and getting oxygen, my brain didn't have the capacity to even reach to, okay, how am I going to get in a better position here? How am I going to move forward? How am I going to maybe make some headway here and get some traction?
Right.
And it just sums up the way I think it's like, if you're food insecure or you're traumatized or life's really difficult or, you know, things are tough, maybe situationally right now, it has that same effect. It drains your energy and takes your attention, and you don't reach to what's next, and you don't dream, and you don't have a whole lot of hope for anything. Like, and despite the fact that he just kicked my ass up and down the mat for 3 months, I learned a lot from that. You know, it was really good.
Well, and how great it must feel also, I would imagine, to just survive, because we're often not put in situations of that core survivability of, I just need to breathe. You know, and knowing that you can actually survive something that maybe your system doesn't know is survivable because it's just never been put into that situation. And the confidence, I would imagine, that would come from that, even though there's probably some emotional defeat going on there also, because it's like, doesn't matter what I do.
You know, I was observing the situation accurately. He could have finished me at any moment. He was just, it was child's play for him. You know, he was trained by the Gracie brother. He was Gracie black belt, you know, had dedicated most of his life to this craft, but he knew how to make me suffer, and I learned a lot from it.
Yeah. It's kind of like watching a cat play with the field mice. You know, they kind of bat it around, and it's like, oh, run away, go ahead, I'll catch you again.
That's what he did. Yeah, he batted me around. And then when I look back at my experience, I'm like, I was in such like somatic panic, like just trying to breathe. My goal was like, how can I take my next breath?
Right.
That I couldn't think about how can I set up getting a choke or an arm bar, or like how can I set up flipping him over and me getting in a better position. The thoughts couldn't come because I was too stuck without my lower level needs met.
Right. Yeah. Very
and that's
interesting.
How it works for all of us in one way or another.
Yeah, in one way or the other. What I'm going to do is I'm going to put a link to this article down below. And that way, you know, for anybody who's interested, you can go through a little bit more in detail. But essentially, it's, you know, there's 5 steps to kind of being the extraordinary person that you want to be: self-mastery, observation, communication, action. And then the last one being the psychological comfort, having that base level of comfort in your life so that you can actually not worry about just breathing and surviving, but being able to reach for what is the next best thing that you want in your life. So, I think this is great information. And, you know, for those that are listening, is really just kind of understanding, okay, where I think the observation within yourself and understanding what are the pain points, what are the places that you struggle moving forward with, you know, where do you feel your limitations are, and kind of feel into those and identify where that pain is coming from. When you're able to identify where that pain is coming from, you now have a source of what needs to be corrected or shifted in the mind's eye, the way you kind of view yourself, the way you believe about yourself in the world. And from there, you can actually change the way that you're filtering the world in and seeing the world, so that you can start moving forward with a clearer picture and really move towards those goals that you want.
And it starts with the choice. Do you want to live an extraordinary life? Do you want to be extraordinary? With the caveat, right? Asterisk, extraordinary is whatever you want that to mean for you personally. Don't let cultural tropes infect what you think you should want. What do you truly want? What would make you truly extraordinary? And then decide it as if deciding it makes it true.
Right.
That's kind of the practice. And then all this information becomes much more useful after that decision.
Yeah, for sure. Next week, we're going to be talking about why we repeat painful life patterns.
I'm looking forward to Ryan telling me why I keep doing this to myself.
You just got to breathe. Just got to breathe, man. If you can just
your
breathe,
problem.
Will,
figure it out. Yeah.
There you go. Yeah. So we'll dive into that, because life, we all live in patterns. And if you are not observing or not aware of the patterns that you're living in, then it's really hard to change anything. And I think it becomes easy for people to get frustrated, to get down on themselves, even get frustrated with themselves, but also the world itself. Like, why are you always against me? And when you're able to identify that. Yeah. And when you're able to identify that pattern and not be a victim, but understand that you have choice in it, then you can really start to move forward in having the things that you want.
Truly understanding how patterns get created, how they get repeated, and how they can be changed opens up a new path for life out of anger and resentment and frustration and bewilderment.
Yeah.
It's a big one.
Yeah. It just takes a lot of weight off the shoulders for so many people when you're able to do that.
It revises you into the position of creator of your experience and your reality a bit, ideally.
Yeah. Very deep, very deep. All righty, Will, anything else for today?
This was a fun one.
This was a fun one.
Got to talk about martial arts. That's a big part of my life. I love it.
Very cool. I'll have to find ways of incorporating martial arts into our conversations then.
Excellent.
Perfect. All right, everybody.
Cool, brother.
With that, thank you much for joining us today. If you have any questions, comment, always feel free to leave them below. If you found just one word of value, we appreciate a like. And if you found 2 words of value, go ahead and leave 2 likes if it's possible. Until then, we'll see you next Tuesday, 10:15. Take care.